Hey, welcome back to my channel. So sorry for the SakuAtsu or late upload. I've been so busy, but I really hope you enjoy this angst. I might even make a part 2 if you guys want it. Let me know in the comments. But for now, on with the video.
From a young age, SakuAtsu had been alone. His parents were always busy with work, leaving him in the care of maids and butlers. But no amount of luxury could replace the attention he craved from them. He rarely went outside, only stepping beyond the walls of his home when his cousin Komori dragged him out of his comfort zone. One day, a sudden knock echoed through the quiet halls of his house. SakuAtsu rushed to the door expecting to see Komori, but it wasn't him. Instead, a random boy stood there shorter than him, with messy blonde hair, light brown eyes and a wide toothy grin. "Hi." The boy greeted, as if he had known SakuAtsu forever. SakuAtsu blinked. "Who are you?" "I'm Atsumu." "And you are?" "Kumi," he replied, unsure why he introduced himself like a question. Then his brows furrowed. "How did you get in?" His house had a massive gate, one that required a key card or someone from inside to open it. There was no way this random kid had just wandered in. Atsumu ignored the question completely. "You wanna play?" SakuAtsu narrowed his eyes at him, still suspicious, but honestly, he was kind of bored. Playing with Komori was fine, but his cousin wasn't always around. And this Atsumu kid seemed persistent. "Fine. Just don't touch anything." "Okay." Atsumu chirped, skipping inside like he owned the place. His eyes sparkled as he took in the grand interior. "Whoa. This place is huge." SakuAtsu simply stared, watching Atsumu like he was some strange creature under observation. "What we gonna play?" "Come on." SakuAtsu led him to the playroom, opening the door to reveal shelves upon shelves of neatly arranged toys. Atsumu gasped, jaw dropping in awe. "Wow. It's beautiful." SakuAtsu rolled his eyes, walking in and grabbing his favorite toy. Atsumu practically threw himself onto the playmat, snatching up a nearby toy with uncontainable excitement. "Let's play zombies." That day was just the beginning. Atsumu started showing up at SakuAtsu's house constantly, sometimes even sleeping over without warning. SakuAtsu never questioned how he got in anymore. He just accepted that Atsumu had somehow claimed his home as his second one. And honestly, he didn't mind. For the first time, he had someone to play with. Someone who made his days less lonely. As time passed, days blurred into years. Their bond grew stronger, and SakuAtsu found himself stepping out of his comfort zone, not for anyone else, but for Atsumu. The once cautious and distant boy became almost clingy. He didn't like being away from Atsumu for too long. With him, he didn't have to overthink or hide. Atsumu made him feel at home. The school bell rang, signaling the end of the day. SakuAtsu picked up his bag and headed toward the exit, already looking forward to the weekend. Fridays meant he could spend time with Atsumu without worrying about school getting in the way. Komori caught up to him, smirking. "So, what you doing this weekend?" "Hanging out with Samu," SakuAtsu answered without hesitation. Komori let out a nervous chuckle, rubbing the back of his head. "You sure you don't want to watch a movie or something?" SakuAtsu barely spared him a glance. "Now, I don't want to keep him waiting." "Kuo, you're obsessed." "And?" Komori sighed dramatically. "And maybe, just maybe, you should hang out with someone other than Atsumu for once." SakuAtsu frowned, adjusting the strap of his bag. "I do." "Oh yeah. Name one person." SakuAtsu opened his mouth then closed it. "You. That doesn't count. I'm your cousin. You're stuck with me." SakuAtsu shrugged, clearly unbothered. "Then I don't need anyone else." Komori sighed in defeat as they walked out of the school gates. He'd learned long ago that arguing with SakuAtsu about Atsumu was pointless. Outside, Atsumu was already waiting. He was standing on the sidewalk, rocking back and forth on his heels, face lighting up the second he spotted SakuAtsu. "Omi," he called, waving enthusiastically. SakuAtsu barely contained the small pleased smile tugging at his lips. He quickened his pace, ignoring Komori's knowing smirk. "Took you long enough." Atsumu huffed when SakuAtsu reached him. "I was 'bout to come drag you out of there myself." Komori made a gagging noise behind them. Okay, I'm leavin'. You two have fun being disgustingly attached. Uh-huh. Sakusa didn't even argue. Instead, he simply followed Atsumu down the street, falling into step beside him. So, what's the plan? Atsumu hummed, tapping his chin. Dunno. But I ain't lettin' you sit inside all day. We're doin' somethin' fun. Sakusa sighed, but it wasn't annoyed, it was the kind of sigh that said, I'll complain, but I'll do it anyway. And he would. Because if Atsumu was the one dragging him along, he didn't really mind. They were back at Sakusa's house, snuggled under a blanket on the couch, popcorn scattered between them. The horror movie played on the screen, the tension growing with every moment. Suddenly, a loud jump scare burst from the TV, and Atsumu jolted. His hand flinging the popcorn everywhere as he ducked into Sakusa's chest. Sakusa let out a soft chuckle, his hand instinctively moving to rub Atsumu's back, his fingers lightly running through the messy blonde strands of his hair. His chest tightened as he felt something inside him stir, something warm and unexpected. His heart beat a little faster, not from the movie, but from the way Atsumu had clung to him so easily. He glanced down at Atsumu, a small smile tugging at his lips. Atsumu looked up at him, his face flushing with embarrassment. Heh. Sorry. His voice was softer than usual, almost shy. Sakusa couldn't help the slight, almost imperceptible smile that tugged at his lips. His fingers continued to play with Atsumu's hair, a comforting, almost automatic gesture. He shook his head gently. It's fine. Atsumu looked up at Sakusa, a playful grin spreading across his face. Without warning, he wrapped his arms around Sakusa's neck, pulling himself closer until their faces were just inches apart. Sakusa's cheeks flushed slightly, caught off guard. You're so cute. Sakusa quickly shook his head, his voice quiet and almost embarrassed. I'm not. Atsumu silenced him with a gentle finger pressed to Sakusa's lips. SHHH. Sakusa blinked, his heart racing a little faster from the closeness. He couldn't quite place what was happening, but it was a feeling he didn't want to push away. Still recovering from the surprise, Sakusa let out a soft sigh. I still can't believe you dyed your hair. Atsumu smiled wider, clearly proud of the change. Doesn't it suit me better? Sakusa got for a moment before nodding, his gaze softening as he looked at Atsumu. Yeah, I guess. You look cuter. Glad you think so. He leaned in a little closer, as if daring Sakusa to say more. Sakusa's face grew even warmer, but he didn't pull back. There was something comforting in the way Atsumu made him feel, as if everything around them faded just a little when they were this close. Atsumu shifted, leaning back down onto Sakusa's chest, resting his head on Sakusa's shoulder as he let out a soft yawn. Sakusa's hand instinctively moved to rub his back, his fingers threading through Atsumu's hair. He looked down at him, concern in his voice. You tired? Sakusa asked gently, his touch soothing as he continued to play with Atsumu's hair. Atsumu blushed slightly, rubbing at his eyes. Yeah, I guess. Sakusa smiled, his heart warm at the sight of Atsumu looking so relaxed. Wanna go to bed? Atsumu shook his head, looking up at him with sleepy, but earnest eyes. No, I wanna spend more time with you. Sakusa's chest tightened at the sincerity in his voice. It wasn't often someone cared to stay this close this long. He leaned down, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of Atsumu's head before softly saying, we can stay up a little longer. Atsumu smiled, his eyes fluttering closed as he snuggled closer, content just being near him. They stayed up a little longer, chatting quietly, but eventually, Atsumu's eyelids grew heavy. He didn't even realize when he drifted off, but suddenly he was asleep, resting soundly on Sakusa's chest. Sakusa looked down, surprised, not realizing that Atsumu had fallen asleep until he felt the weight of him settle in. Sakusa leaned back on the couch, adjusting to get more comfortable. Atsumu remained on top of him, unmoving, and Sakusa gently pulled the blanket over both of them, making sure they were tucked in. His arms, instinctively wrapped around Atsumu, pulling him closer. Feeling the warmth of him against his chest. He gazed down at Atsumu for a long moment, his heart racing in his chest. He reached up, his hand shaking slightly as he tucked a loose strand of Atsumu's hair behind his ear. His heart beat even faster. His face flushed as he realized how close Atsumu was, how he could feel every soft breath he took against him. Sakusa's mind raced, trying to make sense of the feelings swirling in him. He couldn't stop blushing, his chest tightening in ways he didn't quite understand. He didn't know what these feelings were, whether it was just the comfort of having someone close, or something deeper that made him feel this way every time Atsumu was near. But for the moment all he could do was hold him, his heart beating faster with each passing second, unable to look away from the peaceful expression on Atsumu's face. Sakusa had been in a deep, peaceful sleep, until Atsumu ruined it. "Wake up, sleepyhead!" Atsumu practically yelled, jumping onto the bed like a 5-year-old on a sugar high. Sakusa barely had time to process the weight landing on top of him before he let out a strangled gasp. He groaned, cracking an eye open to glare at Atsumu. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Atsumu grinned like an idiot and started shaking him. "I made some in for ya. Get up, ppp." Sakusa tried to resist, but Atsumu, apparently a man with no respect for personal space, grabbed his wrist and dragged him out of bed before he could even protest. The moment they stepped into the dining room, Sakusa's nose twitched. A scent filled the air, one that made his chest tighten instantly. It was familiar. Too familiar. His steps slowed as his brain scrambled to place it, and then it hit him. Atsumu, beaming with excitement, placed a dish in front of him. Sakusa stared. He knew this meal. His throat tightened, and he had to blink a few times as old memories surfaced. Back when things were different. Back when his parents still had time for him. Back when they all sat at the dinner table together, before they got too busy, before they started acting like strangers in the same house. Atsumu tilted his head. "Well, are you just gonna stare at it or what?" Sakusa inhaled sharply. "You okay?" Atsumu asked, voice softer now. Sakusa swallowed the lump in his throat and sat down, gripping the fork a little too hard. He took a bite. His eyes widened. "It tastes like how my mom made it." "Good. That's what I was going for." Sakusa lowered his head slightly, his hair falling over his eyes. He tried to keep himself together, but before he knew it, he was standing up again, wrapping his arms around Atsumu and burying his face in his shoulder. Atsumu tensed for a second before relaxing into the hug, a small blush spreading across his cheeks. He smiled slightly, hugging Sakusa back. Sakusa slowly pulled away, looking up at Atsumu with slightly red eyes. Atsumu wiped his tears with his thumb, his touch lingering a little too long against his cheek. Their eyes locked. Neither of them moved. Their faces were too close now, barely a breath apart. Sakusa's gaze flickered down to Atsumu's lips, and for once Atsumu wasn't grinning or teasing. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, warm, golden, didn't waver. Then, bam! The door slammed open, nearly making Sakusa jump out of his damn skin. "Haikyuu." Komori walked in like he owned the place, grinning as if he hadn't just ruined the moment. "And smells good in here anyways." Sakusa, still slightly stiff, crossed his arms and shot him an unimpressed look. "Do you not knock?" "Why? You got some in to hide." Komori smirked. "What do you want?" "Let's go out. You look like a ghost." "I go out," Sakusa muttered. "School doesn't count. I'd rather stay inside." "Oichhh, come on. Me and the gang were planning something." "Too many people." Komori huffed and placed a hand on Sakusa's shoulder. "What about ice cream?" "Ice cream?" Atsumu practically shouted, his head snapping up. He immediately started bouncing on his feet, grinning ear to ear. Sakusa exhaled through his nose, the corners of his lips twitching. "Calm down, Samu." Komori laughed nervously, rubbing the back of his head. But then his expression shifted when he caught the look on Sakusa's face. He smirked. "Oh. Ice cream it is, then." Sakusa rolled his eyes. "Whatever. Only if Samu comes." "Uh-huh. See ya at 2 p.m. With that, Komori left, leaving Sakusa staring after him with mild regret. Atsumu, however, was still bouncing, excitedly like an overgrown golden retriever. "Ice cream only. We're gettin' ice cream." Sakusa sighed, but his lips curled into the tiniest smile. Yeah. Maybe going out wouldn't be so bad. As they arrived at the ice cream parlor, Atsumu practically bounced with excitement. Komori ordered 2 ice creams and Sakusa raised an eyebrow at him. You forgot Atsumu? Komori blinked, then let out a nervous laugh. Oh. What would he like? Chocolate chip. Atsumu chimed in immediately. Sakusa sighed and turned back to the cashier. 1 chocolate chip, please. Atsumu beamed, grabbing Sakusa's hand as they waited. The simple touch made Sakusa blush slightly, though he quickly looked away. Before the moment could linger, Komori cleared his throat. So. Who's paying? Sakusa's head snapped toward him. What do you mean, who's paying? Heh. So you invited us for ice cream and you're not paying. Oops, I forgot my wallet. Komori suddenly found great interest in the floor. Sakusa let out a long-suffering sigh. You're paying me back. They got their ice creams and found a spot by the window. Atsumu happily licked his cone while gazing outside, lost in thought. Meanwhile, Komori and Sakusa talked, though Sakusa was only half listening. His attention kept drifting to Atsumu. Then, Komori suddenly smirked and leaned in, resting his chin on his hands. Sue. Anyone caught your eye lately? Sakusa froze for a second. His gaze flickered toward Atsumu, who was still watching the street outside, completely unaware. Something warm fluttered in his chest, but he quickly shut it down. He turned back to Komori with an unimpressed look. No. Atsumu's smile faltered. His grip on his ice cream cone tightened slightly, but he said nothing. Sakusa noticed but didn't think much of it. Not even surprised. You don't even go out. I do. As I said, school doesn't count. Fuck off. Komori chuckled. The moment passed. They finished their ice cream, messed around a bit, and eventually headed home. Komori, too lazy to go home, crashed at Sakusa's place for the night. They sat on the couch, chatting aimlessly until Sakusa realized something. Where did Samu go? Komori stretched with a yawn. Dunno, but I'm tired. Without another word, he disappeared into his room, the one that had set up for him a long time ago, like he basically lived there. Sakusa stayed behind, lost in thought. Am I really interested in someone? He frowned, thinking back to Komori's question. It was stupid. He didn't. His feet carried him to his bedroom before his thoughts could finish. There, curled up under the covers, was Atsumu. Asleep. Peaceful. His blonde hair messy, his breathing soft. Sakusa hesitated, then let out a quiet chuckle. He sat beside Atsumu and ran his fingers gently through his hair, then froze. How am I this stupid? His voice was barely a whisper. His chest felt warm again, and this time he didn't push it down. It's you. He swallowed. Is it because of you that I feel this way? Sakusa studied him for a moment. Atsumu's lips were slightly parted, his face relaxed in sleep. You're cute too, he admitted, voice softer than ever. Maybe one day he'd tell him. Just not yet. He leaned down, pressing a light kiss to Atsumu's forehead. Then, he laid back, closed his eyes, and let sleep take him. Sakusa woke up today with no interruptions. No Atsumu jumping on him, no loud morning complaints, just silence. Odd. He turned to look beside him, but Atsumu wasn't there. Frowning, he sat up and headed to the kitchen, expecting to find him rummaging through the fridge or making a mess, but the space was empty. His stomach tightened. Okay. Maybe he's somewhere else. No need to freak out. He checked the bathroom, the balcony, the living room. Every damn corner of the house, every nook and cranny, nothing. Atsumu was nowhere to be found. Sakusa sat heavily on the couch, fingers pulling at the hem of his sleeve, his breathing uneven. Calm down. He probably just went home or out shopping, he muttered, swallowing the unease creeping up his spine. He wouldn't just leave me. Right. Grabbing his phone, he pulled up his messages to text Atsumu, except his number was gone. The pinned chat that was always at the top of his messages vanished. Panic gripped his chest as he frantically searched through his entire phone. No messages. No calls. No contact history. It was like Atsumu had never existed. Maybe my phone's just glitching. His voice wavered, but he forced himself to believe it. I'll wait for him. And so he did. The bright sun gave way to darkness as the moon climbed high, hours slipping past in suffocating silence. Komori checked in on him throughout the day, but SakuAtsu barely responded, only giving short, empty answers. Eventually, Komori stopped pushing. One day of waiting turned into a week. It was like Atsumu had disappeared off the face of the earth. Nothing of his remained, not a single shirt, not a stray hair tie. SakuAtsu stopped going to school. He barely slept, barely ate. The maids and butlers tried to help, but it was useless. He wouldn't leave, unless it was for Atsumu. Days turned into months. One day Komori arrived at the house, his face tight with worry. SakuAtsu hadn't been showing up to school, hadn't answered his calls. Something was wrong. The butler greeted him at the door, his expression grim. You know what's wrong with young master? He isn't telling me. Please find out. He hasn't left his room in days, and he refuses to eat. Komori stopped dead in his tracks. What? His jaw clenched. And you didn't force him? Sir, please remain calm. Komori snapped, his voice sharp with frustration. This isn't a calm situation. Komori shoved past the butler and stormed up the stairs, muttering curses under his breath. He didn't bother knocking, just swung the door open, ready to chew SakuAtsu out for being an idiot. What he wasn't ready for was the absolute disaster in front of him. SakuAtsu was curled up in the corner of his bed, hair a tangled mess, cheeks hollowed out, and dark circles so deep Komori swore he could see his goddamn soul through them. His room smelled like stale air and misery, and the only light source was the dim glow of his phone screen. The fuck is wrong with you? Komori snapped, slamming the door shut behind him. SakuAtsu didn't react. Just kept staring blankly at his phone. Komori marched over, yanked the phone out of his hands, and nearly lost his shit when he saw the screen. It was just his call log. Every recent call was to Atsumu. Unanswered. Komori's voice caught in his throat. He inhaled sharply through his nose and forced himself to calm down. Kuumi. What the hell is going on? SakuAtsu blinked slowly, like he had to process the words before speaking. His voice was hoarse. I can't find him. Find who? SakuAtsu finally looked up at him, eyes hollow. Atsumu. Komori swallowed hard. Kuo, we need to talk. SakuAtsu didn't respond. Komori hesitated before sighing. Look, I didn't want to tell you like this, but Atsumu wasn't real. SakuAtsu's head snapped up. His chest tightened painfully. What? He wasn't real. You were imagining him. SakuAtsu's breath caught. His stomach twisted. What do you mean? You were always talking to air, Kuo, Komori said gently. Calling at Atsumu. You were alone the whole time. SakuAtsu's world shattered. His hands trembled as his mind raced through every memory. Every touch. Every laugh. Every late-night conversation. All of it was in his head. No, that couldn't be. I ate his cooking, SakuAtsu whispered. He hugged me. His voice broke. Komori's face softened. He was real. I know it felt real. But, Kuo. He was never there. SakuAtsu's breathing became uneven. He clutched his head, his entire body shaking. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be. Because if Atsumu wasn't real, then why did his heart still ache for him?